the polling results alone aren't enough. So it does require people to get involved more directly. It does require them to sign up to campaigns and, get involved in elections and so forth.
So I'm your host, Donald Brown, and we have with us Mr. Robert King from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. He's going to help us understand the latest Cape Independence polling results. Robert, can you perhaps give our viewers a background on this Cape Independence polling results and some more? What is the methodology involved? What are the details before we dive into the nitty gritty?
So yes, it was it was a random sample of about 10,080 people in the Western Cape. So it's done to best international practice. It was conducted by Victory Research, which is a well-respected pollster in South Africa. They've got clients ranging from Uber to the Democratic Alliance. So that was who we were working with here. And yes, it gave us some very interesting results on how the Western Cape people respond to secession.
Gareth van Onselen, right?
Yes, I think he actually has a history with the DA as well.
Interesting. Okay, so let's throw up the first slide. What will South Africa look like in 25 years without Cape Independence? Problems will be solved 30%, same as now, 24%. A failed state, 40%. Sorry, if you just heard a beep, that's load shedding kicking in. So yeah, it doesn't seem like the people in the Western Cape are optimistic.
No, certainly not. And I mean, look, you basically got there, if you combine the same as now and failed state together, that's about 2/3 of people thinking things are going to get worse. I think the breakdown as well is that minorities, especially the coloured community, if I just look at the statistics I have here, they seem to think, by a ratio of about 70% to 20%, that it would be getting worse. So, it clearly shows that this is obviously one of the main things fueling secession at the moment. People aren't optimistic for the future. It doesn't seem like they think that there's a likely possibility of moonshot succeeding in 2024. I think if people did believe that, they'd probably think the likelihood of many of our problems being solved would be higher. So that's why people are starting to look at political alternatives now to moonshot and to the ANC, and that's why Cape Independence is becoming far more popular.
And I assume people who believe problems will be solved probably vote for the ANC.
Yes, it is predominantly the ANC voter base that has that opinion.
That's interesting. Okay.
I mean, look, you wouldn't be. I mean, it's quite interesting because when you look at the data, and I think we'll probably come on to this later. But the interesting thing about ANC voters is that they usually vote for the party because they think it's either the least worst option or they want to keep another party out. It was something like 22% of people vote ANC because they actually believe the party's policies and values are what's aligned with theirs.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's incredible. All right. Next slide. So this is probably the big one. 68% of Western Cape voters now support a referendum on Cape Independence. I mean, that's a big number. And I mean, it's just been growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, I mean, look, 3 years ago it was 47%, now it's 68%. And I think in the past, because now we've got, it's a series of poll results now. It's not just simply one or two poll results. We've got three, so we can actually look at what the growth trend has been in each poll. And this gives us an idea now that, we're seeing consistent growth for support for a referendum in the Western Cape of about 10% or so each poll. So it's a huge result. I mean, it's a higher result than, currently people support the DA in the Western Cape. And I think it goes to show that now the issue of independence really crosses both, the partisan divide, as well as the racial divide, which is often a big determining factor in our politics. So if you look at the results on the breakdown side, 82% of coloured respondents supported a referendum, something like 72% of white respondents supported a referendum. And then you even had 47% of black respondents who support a referendum. So clearly, this idea that there's some sort of big racial divide when it comes to support for a referendum, actually, you're starting to see a broad support from the Western Cape population for this.
What do you say to those who say this is too small a sample size and you can't take it seriously?
Well, I mean, you just need to look at polling results in other parts of the world and the sample sizes they use. So, for example, even at the South African level, I mean, some of these polls actually use a sample size of about 1,000 to poll about a potential 30 million voters. So, and even in America, you've got polling sample sizes that range between 1,000 and 3,000. So, we don't have a particularly small sample size here. It's in line with international best practice. And you don't inherently get a very accurate result, even with a very large sample size. I think there was a really well-known example of this in the 1930s in America, where in one of their elections there, they used a really big poll sample size to try and predict the result. And they got it completely wrong. I think they were projecting Franklin Delano Roosevelt was going to lose in a landslide. He ended up winning in a landslide. So it really comes down to, have you got the right sample size? Have you got the right is it a random sample size? Is it representative of the population? That's far more important than, how big your sample size is.
Right. Interesting. Next slide. 58% of Western Cape voters now support Cape independence outright. So that's a clear majority. And I think it's also within, not within the margin of error. So even if you account for the margin of error, the majority would support Cape independence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a massive shift that we've seen here. I mean, it's consistent with what we've seen over the years. 36% in 2020, 58% now, and I think it's starting to align with people starting to people are starting to realise that Cape independence is now a realistic alternative for the Western Cape. I think in the past, a lot of people have been hesitant to state their support for Cape independence because they just don't see it as possible. And there's still a large portion of the province that does view that as the case. But I think we're starting to see people are looking at what's happening. They're looking at what progress is being made in the Cape independence movement. And we're seeing that take place in the poll results now. And again, it's that consistent growth that we've seen with the support of the referendum. So it's almost like there's a 10%, gap between support for a referendum and support for independence. So for example, in 2022, we had about 58% of people supporting a referendum and 46% of people supporting independence. So it's like each poll, the people that supported the referendum in the previous poll are now supporting the independence outright now. It's quite an interesting trend that we see there.
Why do you think individuals within the media are not talking more about this? Because this is significant. I mean, if 58%, of any province were to say they want to break away, and I mean, clearly there's been free polls that shows an indication of growth. I would assume that but this would be mainstream news, but it doesn't seem like it is.
It is very suspicious, especially when sometimes you'll see the media give far more attention to far more suspicious polling, like ones that say, the ANC is in the mid-30s in the polls. So they'll give a lot of attention to that, which is very suspicious. But then you get a poll like this by a respected pollster, which is, it's outside the margin of error. So, even if you take the margin of error into account, there's clearly a majority in favour of independence. And there's no coverage to it whatsoever. I mean, look, I don't want to get into conspiracy thinking on this. I mean, there's clearly a number of reasons. Maybe it's not necessarily, in line with their ideological values, because we obviously know that a lot of our press does lean to the left in many ways. And then you've also got, maybe partisan loyalties there. If Cape independence does become a more major issue in the lead up to the 2024 elections, then you've got a second front opening up now for the DA in the 2024 election campaign. So they're going to be fighting in the north against the ANC and the EFF to try and reduce their numbers there. And then at the same time, they're now going to have the Cape independence movement eating away at them in their own province and potentially costing their provincial majority. So I think the media, it's going to be a bit of a challenge to deal with them. I'm sure this has been the case with other movements around the world before. But I think, it's just a case of, keeping the momentum up, building this movement, getting those ground forces ready. So if need be, you can just work your way around the media and get to the people directly.
Right. So that's it more clear cut. 68% support a referendum, 58% support Cape independence outright. And there you can see once again the growth over a period of, it's free polls.
And interestingly, the big driver of that growth has been the support of the coloured community. So, because this was the first poll where we saw higher support for a referendum and Cape independence outright among coloured respondents than we did see among white respondents. So, in the first poll, I think it was somewhere only in the 30s or something along those lines, support for independence among coloured respondents. And now we're seeing it at 75%. So you've seen that massive shift in the Western Cape over the last 3 years among the coloured community. And that could possibly, be to do with the fact that you've also seen simultaneously a rise in coloured identity politics as well. So obviously we've seen the emergence of the Cape Coloured Congress. We've seen the emergence of the Patriotic Alliance, which doesn't support Cape independence. But nonetheless, it's,
it seems like both don't. Both now don't support Cape independence.
Yeah, well, I don't know about the current situation. Well, look, I know they rebranded to the National Coloured Congress, but it's still, and it's a bit strange because obviously once you reach record, high polling numbers among this demographic on the issue of independence, that you suddenly change your position on it. It seems like a weird electoral strategy. But we'll see what happens in the next elections. We'll see if it works out for them. But I think those trends are aligning in many ways. The trends that are causing people to vote for the Patriotic Alliance and the National Coloured Congress are the same ones that are also seeing them move towards Cape independence as well.
Do you think there's any particular reason why it's grown significantly amongst coloured people and not, for example, white people? Why is the growth so much more amongst coloured people?
Well, I think it's because you've already reached quite a high ceiling. I mean, in each poll, there hasn't really been much growth among white respondents. And I think that really has to do that they were always at a high mark to begin with. So there's been just a lot more room to grow with the coloured community because, I mean, look, clearly Cape independence from their perspective is very advantageous to them. I mean, they are the largest voting group in the Western Cape, so they would have the most leverage when it comes to determining the political course. They aren't a majority of voters, so it's not like one group dominating the others, but there's still quite a large voting bloc in an independent Cape. So that probably, having control of, having a bigger say over their destiny, I think probably plays a big role in that decision. And then also you just see, as is with the case with everyone, we're seeing a decline in our living standards. We're seeing just the general decay of society in the Western Cape and South Africa, and people are looking for political alternatives. I think maybe you're seeing with coloured voters, they're seeing more disillusionment with the DA, and they're trying to see what's a better alternative for us to go with now.
Interesting stuff. Okay, next slide. Now, this is very fascinating. Which parties do Cape independence supporters vote for? I mean, close to 70% of DA voters vote for support Cape independence. I mean, that's very significant. I mean, the argument for a long degree has been that the only people that support Cape independence vote for the Cape Independence Party, but here you can clearly see that that's not the case.
Well, the Cape Independence Party, I don't think even registers on this poll. I mean, they're far on the edge there with the other party category. But yes, look, this is very similar to what we saw with Brexit, where the UK Independence Party in the most successful election only got 13% of the national vote. Yet, and I think it was about 4 million votes. Yet Brexit ended up getting 70.4 million votes. So a large portion of those votes came from the Conservative Party and to a slightly lesser degree the Labour Party. And that's what I said at the beginning: is the issue of a referendum and Cape independence is beginning to cross, that party divide. So, you don't just need to vote for a secessionist party. Your vote, it's quite clear that most of our supporters are DA supporters, and they're going to be getting they're going to be having a really difficult choice in 2024, because if the DA continues to be either ambiguous or hostile to the idea of an independence referendum, then those DA voters that currently support Cape independence are going to have to choose possibly between either voting for the DA directly or voting for an independence party that is going to potentially be in coalition with them.
And what's interesting here is the 18% that support the ANC. It's sort of, are they confused?
Well, as I said at the beginning, 22% of ANC voters vote for their party because they believe in the party's policies and values. They usually, they either want to keep another party out, probably the DA, or they think that the ANC is the least worst option. But I think, a lot of those facts regarding Cape independence still remain the same. So, for example, we would have more revenue to invest in this province. There would be more decisions being made locally at the national level on the province. So your vote becomes more powerful, and you get to have a greater say in the decisions affecting your community. So I think a lot of those issues still stay true if you're an ANC voter or an EFF voter or a DA voter. I think people are starting to look at change, and that depends on that doesn't matter which party you're in.
Great stuff. All right. Anything else you want to say on this slide? Can we move on?
No, look, I mean, I'm just saying, if you just look at the results, currently about only 5% of independence voters are voting for secessionist parties. So that's an interesting stat to keep in mind.
Okay. And there we have it again. Of DA voters support referendum and support Cape independence.
I mean, it's honestly shocking, really, how, with 80% of your own voters supporting a referendum, how you can still try and just completely disregard this. I think it does come down to the sort of arrogant attitude we see from certain officials in the DA. I don't think this is sustainable for the DA in the long term, because either they're going to end up either calling a referendum themselves because that political pressures are going to become too great, or they're going to end up in a coalition with an independent party because they're going to lose a lot of that 80% of that voter base that wants a referendum to parties that provide an alternative to them. And then obviously there's that 61% figure of DA voters who support Cape independence outright. That's also a very important figure not to ignore.
Some would argue that the DA is perhaps ignoring this because you can't really sell the moonshot or whatever the hell it's called now. I think it's the multi-party charter. You can't sell both. You can't sell Cape independence and the multi-party charter. It's it's sort of like you have to choose. Either you want to break away or you want to fight for South Africa. It conflicts with your message if you try to sell both.
Well, look, I would disagree. I mean, I think the Freedom Front Plus at the moment is doing it quite well in the Western Cape. But at the end of the day, if we look at what the DA is saying to us, they're saying in 2024, if this multi-party charter fails, we're going to be in the doomsday scenario. Our constitutional order is going to collapse. Our democratic order is going to collapse. We're going to see, racial and ethnic violence on the likes that have never been seen before, according to John Steenhuisen. So we're currently being, told rather go for the option that has a far lower chance of success. And that might result basically in your, in the collapse of your life and your living standards, rather than going for the option of Cape independence, which actually gives us full control over our future. I think it's a very, look, it's obviously politics. The DA have got their national ambitions, but I think, they can't completely ignore, the interests and the concerns of the voters of the Western Cape, who for the last 14 years have loyally given them a majority of their votes. Now they're just being sold out in order to achieve a national ambition. I think that's quite disgraceful, really.
Right. Next slide. Oh, yeah. And this is what you've been talking about. The racial composition of those who support Cape independence. 67% colored, 10% black, and 23% white. So there's quite the stark contrast.
Yeah, so when you hear people in the media, and especially in the woke Twitter spaces, and the EFF Twitter spaces, of course, when they try and present this as some sort of white nationalist project or reintroducing apartheid and all that rubbish, this is the figure to show them. 77% of Cape independence supporters aren't white, so it's completely not illogical starting point to begin with.
Well, clearly the black voters, it seems like, believe that Cape independence would perhaps worsen their lives or bring back apartheid.
Well, I don't know if you have that polling graphic there, but I think they there was a polling question asking whether people's lives would be better off in an independent Cape or not, and the breakdown for that. And it was quite interesting because I think we've seen a massive increase over the last 3 years in Black respondents thinking that their lives would be better in an independent Cape. I think in the first poll that was done in 2020, it was in the low teens, something like that, of Black respondents who thought their lives would be better off. And now we're about 40% mark. So clearly, there is growing confidence from every sector of Western Cape society that their lives will be better off in an independent Cape. It obviously takes time with, certain groups more than others, to gain that trust and to gain that confidence. But it's moving in the right direction. And I think also, it's when it comes to this argument, when people try and make out as if in an independent Cape you're going to start to get all this ethnic conflict and, you're going to get all these instigators trying to cause problems. I think when you get to the point where more and more people, regardless of their background, are confident that their lives will be better off, then those attempts to engage in ethnic mobilization and all those destabilization tactics start to become a lot more difficult, because people aren't going to deliberately worsen their own living standards in that way to assist your radical agenda.
Why do you think the white support is fairly low here?
I mean, it's not, if you think about it, it's not really fairly low. I think in the polling results, let me just confirm it here. It was something like, I'm just trying to find the results. Oh, yes. So 62% of white respondents support Cape independence. And if you think of it, 58% of the overall Western Cape population support Cape independence. So it's sort of so basically the percentage of the Western Cape population that is white is sort of in line with the composition of Cape independence supporters that is white in that regard.
Okay, I see. So, okay, this is a bit this is the percentage composition of the total vote, but this just shows there's actually just so much colored supporters that the white percentage is so low.
Yes, that's what this poll represents. So even when you look at Black supporters, it isn't the case that only 10% of Black people in the Western Cape support Cape independence. The figure's somewhere now about 30%,
okay.
which is a record high figure as well, and it's been growing consistently each year.
Great. Okay, there we go. Do you believe your quality of life will improve with Cape independence? 80% colored, 39% Black, and 72% white.
So yeah, no, I think that really is the crucial figure. And it says their overall support is at 64%. I think that's the crucial figure, because when you look at movements to pushing rather radical change when it comes to society, you get lots of people that really like the radical change, but they think that, okay, if I go for it, my living standards are going to get worse, even though it's a nice thing to achieve, independence or freedom and the ability to make my own decisions. There might be economic consequences. I'm not going to go for that. But we see the opposite with Cape independence, where clearly the overwhelming majority of people in the Western Cape think their lives are going to get better. Actually, it's becoming quite clear to the majority of people in the Western Cape that Cape independence is now not the risky option. Remaining part of South Africa and potentially being subject to doomsday is going to be the risky option for voters. So I think that's the important thing. When voters, especially those voters who are still undecided on the issue, look at the facts and they look what's going on, it's becoming quite clear that if you want safety, if you want security, if you want a better economic prospects for your children, then Cape independence is the way to go.
Right. What drives support for Cape independence? You've also mentioned this. South Africa going in the wrong direction, 77%. Want more control over their own policies, 76%. Quality of life will improve, 64%. That's an interesting breakdown. Want more control over their own policies. I wouldn't be surprised if a big number is their control of borders.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, at the moment, South Africa doesn't even have control over its borders. But yeah, I mean, look, that is a big issue in the Western Cape at the moment. And we have seen a rather rapid and a very uncontrolled rate of urbanization and migration into the Western Cape over the last 10 years. And I think, especially when we look at the coloured community, who often have to deal with the brunt of race-based policies and illegal settlements and all these issues that come with uncontrolled immigration, then that's why that is also a driving factor in this massive surge in support for Cape independence among that group.
I'd love to speak to the 23% of South Africans who believe the country's going in the right direction. I mean, yeah.
Look, I think it, again, it does often line up with that ANC demographic, and also, some people who maybe are still hoping that Ramaphosa is going to sort things out. He's still playing the long game. We just need to give him another term in 2024, and then South Africa will be on the right track after that.
Okay, next slide. Oh, this is an interesting one. South Africa belongs equally to all races. 80% of colored people say yes. 31% of black people say yes. And 88% of white people say yes. Now, some would say that number amongst black respondents is concerning.
Yeah, look, it is. Look, I mean, in some ways, it is concerning. I think this is, what happens when over a 30-year period you have minorities demonized in South Africa, where you have a government that, just blatantly, has admitted they actually haven't really cared too much for minorities over the last few years. And you can see that in their rhetoric, and you can see how they basically not just attacked white people, but they've also attacked colored people when they've complained about, inequality in job opportunities in the Western Cape, and they've just been told to migrate to other parts of South Africa, like a reversed forced removals of sort. And then you've also got the EFF that has gained prominence in the last 10 years and has pushed the political debate in many ways further to the racialist radical left. And they talk about, obviously kill the Boer and all that kind of quite concerning rhetoric. So I think this is really a culmination of all the decay and rhetoric of the last 30 years of South African politics.
It's interesting. I've asked Peter Groenewald and Michael Beaumont their opinion on this. Peter says this is an indication of inequality, that black people feel that they're still unequal. Michael Beaumont says this is an argument against illegal immigration, not necessarily racist, that this is an argument against the illegal immigrant from, I don't know, Nigeria or the Congo or whatever. So what would you say to that?
Well, look, I would probably agree more with Peter Groenewald's way of thinking in that regard. I think, it does come down to the decay. And look, if you end up in a situation where you've actually got a society that's growing, where people can see opportunities, where people are a bit more optimistic, you don't have 77% of people thinking we're going in the right direction. When you've got growth and it's being seen in every part of society, I think that does help bring down the racial tensions that exist. So, look, for example, if you can see that the next day is going to be better than this day, that your kids could go into university, you're not going to have as much resentment and hatred towards someone of a different background just because currently they've got better opportunities than you, because you can see that you're moving to that position as well. So I think, the inequality factor does play a big role, and that's why I say this is a consequence of the ANC as well, because they've really just stagnated the economy for the last few decades. When it comes to the illegal immigrant issue, yeah, I mean, look, clearly South Africa is not the most friendly country to immigrants, regardless of where they come from. And yeah, look, I think there might be some truth to that, but I think it also might extend to other race groups as well.
Yeah. Just interesting, the stark contrast. But yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's not too much of a surprise, because obviously, I think I find it quite interesting that you've got 12% of white people that somehow don't believe that South Africa believes equally to all races. It seems like it's a very weird mindset to have, really, that you don't feel like you belong where you've been born and where you've grown up. that you don't have a right to equally call that your home. I think that's a very strange mindset to have.
Yeah. It's interesting. One would assume if it was a racist question or a racist, people perceive it as a racist question, it would make sense that the white percentage would also be low because they would feel victimized. In my mind, at least. Why is it only black people that, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, moving on to this next graphic you've pulled up here. I mean, this is also more alarm bells for the DA going into the 2024 election campaign. As I said previously in the show, 22% of ANC respondents vote for the party because they like the policies and values. The DA is the second lowest party, so it's 32% with the DA. And then you've got 52% of people either voting for them because they're the least worst option or they want to keep the ANC out. So, on one hand, this goes to show that the DA has quite a lot of loyalty because people are still voting for them, even though they don't necessarily agree with their party policies and values. But at the same time, it goes to show that if a viable political alternative emerges that can appeal to a significant chunk of the DA voter base, and it doesn't scare people, and it doesn't, they don't feel as if they're going to be letting in the ANC if they vote for this alternative, then the DA is in serious trouble. I think that all hopes of a majority will be gone if that does emerge. But interestingly, when you look at the highest parties that were polled when it came to liking their policies and values, the Freedom Front Plus, which is at the moment the largest independence party that there is, had 91% of people voting for them because they like their policies and values. And I think we're starting to see that shift to the Freedom Front as well as pro-independence parties. Across the Western Cape, we saw that massive Drakensberg by-election where their vote share went up from 13 to 41%, and the DA went down from 80% to 49%. And then we also saw a big shift in Cape Agulhas where the DA lost about 20 percentage points in one by-election. So clearly, massive trends are taking place in the Western Cape. But of course, a lot of people might not be too aware of that because simply the media doesn't pick up on it.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, if you speak to the average DA voter, it doesn't seem like they even know what the DA's policies are. I think that would perhaps be the number one problem, that many people don't actually know what the DA stands for, but they do know what the Freedom Front or many of these other smaller parties stand for. So it might be more of an indication, not necessarily that they don't like the DA, but they don't even know what they stand for. So if you don't know what they stand for, how can you like their policies?
Yeah, it's quite interesting that the largest and second largest parties in the Western Cape and South Africa both have the lowest number of people voting for them for their policies. I mean, there is obviously, I think, a big tribalist approach to it, and we see that in all parts of the world, really. I mean, you see that in America with the Republicans and Democrats, the very tribal voting there. You see that to a degree in the UK. It's a factor all over the world. And I guess if you're voting for a smaller party, it's a bit more of a gamble in some people's eyes. So you really need to believe in the party's message and vision in order to support them.
Right. And 70% of Western Cape voters would prefer to buy things local.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, buying local is good. It supports our local economy. It's better for the environment. Not sure too much how much I can develop on that. But look, I mean, the Western Cape at the moment is one of the most prosperous provincial economies in South Africa. We are seeing lots of industries emerge here where in the rest of the country they're moving out. So I think, whether people like it or not, really, we're going to see more Western Cape made products emerging in the near future.
Great. Is there anything else you want to say in terms of this polling that you find perhaps I missed or anything?
Not really. I think we went through the major points there. Obviously, the key point to always remember, the headline figure from this all was that 68% figure of people wanting a referendum on Cape independence. Obviously, that in itself is not enough. It's quite clear because the media doesn't pick up on it and the DA likes to disregard it. To put that pressure on the DA, the polling results alone aren't enough. So it does require people to get involved more directly. It does require them to sign up to campaigns and get involved in elections and so forth. So at the moment, there's a big campaign going on called the Cape Referendum Alliance. You can go and find out about it at capereferendum.org. They've got a letter that already has thousands of people that have signed up to it, that asks Alan Windey to call a referendum and give us a response before the 10th of October. So if you want to really put pressure on the DA, if you want to see a referendum on election day next year, then go over to capereferendum.org and sign the letter.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you for your time. This has been great.
Thank you very much, Donald.